In this video, we're going to review some of the rules that we've learned concerning who may enforce a contract. We know that the parties may enforce a contract, as well as their representatives, their guardians, or their executors. In class, though, we discussed two additional kinds of persons: intended third-party beneficiaries and assignees. What are the rules with respect to them? Well, let's start with respect to intended third-party beneficiaries. Here we saw two rules. First, an intended third-party beneficiary of a promise may enforce the promise. Second, a person is an intended third-party beneficiary of a promise if the promisee intended to give the person the benefit of the promise and a right to enforce would effectuate the party's intention. What's the pattern of argumentation here? Well, the plaintiff claims that the defendant made a promise and didn't keep it. The defendant's defense is that, well, the plaintiff is not a person entitled to enforce. The plaintiff then replies, well, in fact, I am an intended third-party beneficiary. We saw this pattern of argumentation in both the Bain v. Gillespie and the Seaver v. Ransom cases. In Bain v. Gillespie, a store owner said, a referee promised to be competent, and he didn't do it. The ref said, well, you're not a person entitled to enforce. I made that promise to the Big Ten. I didn't make it to you. Now, this store owner tried to claim that it was a third-party beneficiary, that it would have benefited if the ref had been competent because the home team would have won and the store owner would have made more sales. But it was clear that the store owner was not an intended third-party beneficiary because the Big Ten never intended to give the store owner the benefit of the referee's promise. By contrast, in Seaver v. Ransom, a husband promised his wife that he would leave money in his will to his wife's niece. The court held that the niece was an intended third-party beneficiary who could enforce the contract. It was clear that the wife intended the niece to have the benefit of the promise, and in addition, it was appropriate to give her the right to enforce, because otherwise no one would enforce the promise. Now what about assignees? Well, there are three rules. First, an assignee of contract rights may enforce those rights. And second, a party may assign rights under a contract unless the assignment would increase the burden on the promisor, the assignment is forbidden by statute, or the assignment is precluded by contract. And third, to assign rights under a contract, a party must manifest an intention to surrender the right permanently to another person. What's the pattern of argumentation here? Well, it's very similar. The plaintiff claims that the defendant made a promise and didn't keep it. The defendant's defense is, well, you're not a person entitled to enforce. And the plaintiff's reply is, well, the promisee assigned his or her rights to me. We saw a very good example of that in the Herzog v. Iris case. The plaintiff, Dr. Herzog, sued the defendant, Iris and Lowry, the law firm, saying, look, you promised to turn over the proceeds from one of my patients' settlements. The law firm's defense was, well, you're not the patient. We didn't make the contract with you. And the doctor's reply was, yes, but the patient assigned his right to the proceeds to me. And it was clear in that case that the patient was entitled to assign the rights, and it was also clear that the patient had manifested an intention to assign those rights. In other words, to give up the rights permanently to the doctor. By contrast, in Shiro v. Drew, that last element was missing. In that case, a borrower promised a lender that as soon as the borrower received payment under a contract with a third party, he would turn the payment over to the lender. The court held, well, that's not an assignment. It's not an assignment because the borrower was not giving up the right to receive payment from the third party. Instead, the borrower is merely making a promise that once it received the money, it would turn the money over. That was a promise, it wasn't an assignment.